Hello, my name is Michelle Takey, and my project is on Lightner Witmer. He was the first person to phrase the coin clinical psychology and was one of the founding members of the American Psychological Association. Lightner Witmer was born on June 28, 1867, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the eldest of four, to Catherine and David Witmer. Since his family was successful, he was afforded the ability to attend one of the best prep schools in America. In September of 1880, he was enrolled at the Episcopal Academy of Philadelphia and graduated from the academy on June 30th of 1884. And that fall, he was enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania. In the fall of 1888, he graduated from Penn and accepted a teaching position at Rugby Academy, which was a secondary school for boys. Although he was still teaching in the fall of 1889, he had entered the grad program in the philosophy department as he was working towards a political science degree. He was enrolled in a grad school under the professor James McKean Cattell in the philosophy department. At the time, Cattell was the best psychologist and the best trained, as he studied under both Wundt and Galton. But Cattell had soon left the department, and Witmer decided he was going to leave as well and decided to move on to the University of Leipzig. Witmer planned on earning a PhD under the advisory of Wilhelm Wundt, and then to later return to the psychology department at Penn. So he went to Germany in 1891 to go to the university. On March 29th, 1893, he returned with a doctoral diploma from the University of Leipzig. After returning home with his doctoral degree, he presented to the American Psychological Association as a new member using his dissertation, which focused on the experimental aesthetics of simple spatial relationships of form. And later, in 1896, Witmer founded the world's very first psychological clinic at Penn. When he started publishing papers such as The Practical Work in Psychology, he started detailing the importance of applying scientific research. Shortly after, he enlisted in the United States military, but was discharged within the same year. Quickly, his research turned towards teaching towards the weakness, which nowadays we would best call that working with people with learning disabilities. And his interests were more towards things like nervousness, stammering, speech problems, overexcitability, and things like that. When the famous article came out regarding clinical psychology, he had coined not only the name of the what is now known as clinical psychology, but he had expressed how he had come up with what he was trying to teach, more so from when he was teaching at his position at Rugby Academy, from one of the boys there, and how he had seen this gentleman go through struggles at the school, and how he had studied that boy, and how he thought that maybe by studying him he could help him. So from the article that he had written and published called Clinical Psychology, this is what he had written about the boy. And I'm just going to read from that real quickly. My attention was first drawn to the phenomena of retardation in the year 1889. At that time, while a student of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, I had charge of the English branches in a college preparatory school of Philadelphia. In my classes at this academy, I was called upon to give instruction in English to a boy preparing for entrance to college, who showed a remarkable deficiency in the English language. His composition seldom contained a single sentence that had been correctly formed. For example, there was little or no distinction between the present and past tenses of verbs. The endings of many words were clipped off, and this was especially noticeable in those words in which a final ending distinguished the plural from the singular, or an adverb from an adjective. As it seemed doubtful whether he would ever be able to enter college without special instruction in English, I was engaged to tutor him in the English branches. I had no sooner undertaken this work than I saw the necessity of being with the elements of language and teaching him as one would teach a boy, say in the 3rd grade. Before long, I discovered that I must start still further back. I had found it impossible through oral and written exercises to fix his mind the elementary forms of words as part of speech in a sentence. This seemed to be owing to the fact that he had verbal deafness. He was quite able to hear even a faint sound like the ticking of a watch, but he could not hear the difference in the sound of such words as grasp and grasped. This verbal deafness was associated with, and I now believe was probably caused by, a defect of articulation. Thus, the boy's written language was a fairly exact replica of his spoken language, and he probably heard the words and that others spoke as he himself spoke them. I therefore undertook to give him an elementary training in articulation to remedy the defects which are ordinarily corrected. Through imitation, by the time a child is 3 or 4 years old, I gave practically no attention to the subject required in English for college entrance, spending all my time on the drill in articulation, in perfecting his verbal audition, and teaching him the simplest elements of written language. The result was a great improvement in all of his written work, and he succeeded in entering the college department of the University of Pennsylvania in the following year. In 1894-95, I found him as a college student in my classes at the University of Pennsylvania. His articulation, his written discourse, and his verbal audition were very deficient for a boy of his years, In consequence, he was very unable to acquire the technical terminology of my branch, and I had no doubt that he passed very few examinations, excepting through the sympathy of his instructors who overlooked the serious imperfections of his written work. Owing to the fact that he was in other respect a fair student, when it came to the final examinations for the bachelor's degree, however, he failed and was compelled to repeat much of the work of his senior year. He subsequently entered and graduated from one of the professional departments of the university. His deficiencies in language, I believe, have never been entirely overcome. I felt very keenly how much this boy was losing through his speech defect. His schoolwork, his college course, and doubtless his professional career were all seriously hampered. I was confident at the time, and this confidence has been justified by subsequent experience with similar cases, that if he had been given adequate instruction in articulation in early years of childhood, he could have overcome his defect. With the improvement in articulation, there would have come in improved power of apprehending spoken and written language. That nothing was done for him in the early years, nor indeed at any time, excepting for the brief period of private instruction in English and in some lessons in elocution, is remarkable, for the speech defect was primarily owing to an injury to the head in the second year of life, and his father was a physician who might have been expected to appreciate the necessity of special training in the case of retardation caused by a brain injury. So just from his study over one case, he had learned how valuable it is to work with one person, and how working with this person and studying this person could help somebody with defects learn better later in life. And with this one, which may seem, by his quote unquote verbal deafness, we would consider probably dyslexia these days. During the 20s, the clinic had seen almost 600 cases each month. And with the publication of the psychological clinic, his journal, it introduced more familiarity with his research, with his term clinical psychology, and gave more familiarity with why this was necessary. From 1906 to 1956, Witmer held the title of psychologist and stayed with the training for the School of Feeble-Minded Children, and also worked for the Devereux School, which was also just a boarding school for the developmentally delayed children as well. In 1907, Witmer founded Witmer School, which was originally located in Rose Valley, Pennsylvania, but was later brought to Devon in the fall of 1921. It was a part of the Devereux School, private school area, where Lightner taught to the then said as feeble-minded, but special, exceptional minded children that we would teach to these days as special education. So all exceptional kids of all ages, all kinds. These were boarding school kids, and it had a limit of 12 kids in these boarding schools. And Witmer stayed with this boarding school even after his retirement from Penn, which was in 1937. He continued working at the Devereux schools. Lightner contributed much to how we see special education, and of course to the idea of clinical psychology. He did have a great life. He did get married, however, did not have children of his own. I think that he contributed to children all over the world with his help of teaching the children who need it the most and being such a great inspiration to those children, even after retiring. In 1956, he did pass away from heart failure, but his legacy has lived on, in the continuation of these schools and these programs for the children who are in special ed, and the knowledge that we've gained from what he started for us. And I think that his legacy will continue to be a part of our lives forever. Thank you.